Hey everybody, so a value painting done with watercolors. So a couple things that you're going to need. You're going to need watercolor of some kind. There are two major kinds of watercolor. You've got the pan watercolor or liquid watercolor like this. I'm going to be using this one for my demo today, but if you do have liquid watercolor that you want to use, you'll need a palette to put it in. Either one that you're going to use, you're going to need some paintbrushes, generally a variety of paintbrushes, and some water. Do be aware on your paintbrushes though. For watercolor, you need soft bristle brushes. If it is very stiff, I don't mean stiff like, oh, it's a little bit tough right now because it's not wet. I mean like it's physically stiff like straw or something. You cannot use stiff bristle brushes for watercolor. Water, whenever added to paper, makes paper weak, and a stiff bristle brush will scratch straight through your paper. So with the watercolor, you do want to make sure that you have soft bristle brushes in order to make sure that you don't accidentally scrub your paper into nothing. So paintbrushes, a variety of sizes. You want some kind of paper towel in order to, one, blot off your paintbrush and or clean up any spills. And obviously, you need your actual artwork. Other things that are optional would be different materials for watercolor techniques. That might be something like rubbing alcohol or salt to do those different techniques. In this particular case, we're not going to be doing any special techniques, so we won't be using any. So yeah, first thing that you got to do is you got to prep your watercolor. If I were using the liquid watercolor, I'd be putting it into here. For now, I am just going to be mixing some. So watercolor is activated by water, so I got to dip my paintbrush first, and then I'm going to come over here into my pan color and start mixing. The more I mix, the more pigmented my color is going to be, because that's how watercolor is. I'm activating some of this paint in here with the water. If I use more water, it will end up more see-through. If I use less water, it will end up slightly more opaque. Up here, all of these little pans, essentially, are places where I can mix colors. So if I want to do a red-violet, what I can do is I can come in here and mix some violet paint down, and if I streak that out, it's still pretty dark. So I think that's probably pretty good for violet. Now I need to come in and rinse my brush off. Note that I only have my water up to about here or so, about halfway up the cup. That way I don't splash so much. I'm gonna blot that off, and yep, no purple in there, so I can get some more of this, and I can start swirling around in my red. I'm gonna swirl that around for a little bit. If I added a lot of water to this red, it's just going to be very weak and sad. So if I get this and I start putting it into here, I can start making a red violet. So I think I want some more red in that. So I can see an obvious change. That one looks more plummy, that's good. And this right here would be my base mid-tone color. For this particular value exercise, there are only 3 values that are present. So this would be my main kind of color right here. It's fairly dark. It's not too dark though, which is nice. Watercolors do dry a little lighter, by the way. So be aware that whatever colors this is when wet, that is not the same color it will be when dry. All right, so I need 2 more values. I need a lighter value and I need a darker value. For a lighter value, the white of my paper is what I'm going to use to make this lighter. And that means that I just need to make this less, or rather more, see-through. So I'm gonna take some of my color, I'm gonna put it over here. This stuff over here, if it dries out a little, all I need to do in order to reactivate it is make it wet. So over here, I'm just gonna put some of this paint, and I'm gonna add more water to it. By diluting this, I'm basically making it thinner and therefore making it more see-through and therefore making it lighter because I've got that white paper underneath. If I had dark paper underneath, I would be making it darker by making it more see-through. Watercolor is in and of itself more see-through in general, so you can go too far with this by a fair ways. But you can see right here, whenever I paint that down, it is not as dark as the previous one. Now, because my white should be almost completely white, I am going to continue adding just a little bit more to this right here. That's fine. I probably should have done a swatch somewhere else to make sure it was as pale as I wanted it to be before putting it in my swatch square, but that's fine. We'll live with it. It'll be okay. Nothing's going to harm anything. All right, now, to get a darker version of my color, I'm going to do the exact same thing, only I'm going to add a little bit of a darker color to this. I'm going to come over here, pull this off to the side. Let me see. I think I can make a little bit more of this red violet because I think I'm going to need it. And I am going to add just a touch of black paint to it. I don't like making colors mixed with black in watercolor, but just a little bit of black will do me just fine. I do not want a ton of black here. It will make this a black paint rather than a dark purple paint. So those are my 3 values right there. Now, in watercolor, you work from light to dark. So I am not going to touch my middle main tone here. I'm not going to touch my dark tone here. I'm going to start with this guy. So on this piece of paper, all of my areas that are pure white are going to be that lightest color of purple that I have. If I had any places that I needed to actually keep pure white, I just wouldn't paint on them at all. But in this particular case, since all of my lightest areas are going to be my lightest color, this entire square here is going to get a wash that is one solid layer of this purple. Now I'm going pretty quickly here. I'm trying not to add any more water than I need to because more water that I add in here is going to make a wrinkly paper. So I'm just going to put this in here and then spread this out. I'm trying to do this pretty quickly so that my paint doesn't end up drying out on its edges. Where it dries out on its edges, I will be able to see that line later. Most of this will generally self-level while it's wet, so I will end up with very soft edges if I have any edges. So that is going to go on, and then I need to let this dry. So I have to sit here for a minute and give it a moment. Other ways that you can make it dry a little faster, you can waft it with your hand. But one tip, if you hold this up and you have drips happen, then you have too much liquid on your paper. Do not ever have that much. If you have so much that you are dripping, too much drip. I do not have drip, which is good, but I do need to dry this fast, so I could waft it, or I could be, resourceful and go find a hairdryer, which I think I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna go dry this off with a hairdryer real quick, and then I will come back to show you the next stage. All right, so I blasted this with a hairdryer. It probably only took a minute or so. It's no longer cold. It's still a little damp, but that shouldn't hurt anything. If I find that it does, then I'm going to pause what I'm doing and go blast it with the hairdryer for a little bit longer. But really, it should only take about anywhere from 45 seconds to a minute and a half of drying. If it takes you longer than that, you're using too much water. You need to ease back. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this a section at a time, or at least as much of a section at a time that I can, given the subject matter that I have on hand. And I'm gonna start painting all over the areas that are going to be my darkest color, as well as my next darkest color. So up here in this forehead area, I've got these little blotchies. So that's what's gonna go next. I'm not trying to make it perfectly perfect because I don't got that kind of time always. But we're gonna just come in here and give them these little blotchies, these featherish bits. There are some that are coming up here all the way to the edge. I need to make sure I get. It's pretty dense over this way, so. All right, then let's see. I've got this area up in the corner, so it kind of blotches into this stuff and then comes down where his eye is. Actually, it doesn't go around his eye, it goes all the way through his eye. That's all dark zone. Okay, cool. And comes up this way. Again, I'm trying to go pretty quick. Messed up a little bit, brought it down a little too far right there, but that's okay, I'll survive. I'm trying to make sure that I don't have these edges sit wet for too long and dry on me, otherwise I'm going to get those strange little halos I was talking about before. So I've got this little white area in here that's getting those in. And this is all dark zone. This is all dark. We've got a little bit of streaky down here, and we've got a little white spot down here. And this is where it's really important that I've mixed up enough of this middle color, because if I didn't, then I might be in trouble. But that's okay. I'm at a part where I think my darker color will cover up any weird halo effects, or I'm hoping it will. I've got these little streaks in here, so I'm going to get those splotched in real quick. And they're going to come up here. This, for the most part, is covered. All covered. There's going to be some white over here, just a little bit right there. A few little bits right through here. So I'm helping myself out by kind of outlining where I need to keep those light zones, and then I'm just going to paint in around those. Ooh, mixed it up. Okay, we're going to pretend like that happened. And come in, paint around, paint around, paint around. Got a little spot there, a little spot there. All right, so you can see here where I ended up having a line sit too long. I can try and feather that out with a little bit more paint and a little bit of water. It will not be 100% successful just because of how watercolor works. But anyhow, now that I have these little edges, I can come in and I can sort of fine tune some of my edges a little bit because I do want them to be somewhat the correct shape. So I'm gonna come in and get those in a little bit. Again, doesn't need to be perfect. And from there, I need to, again, wait for this to dry or blast it with a hairdryer and come in with the last shade of dark purple. All right, so now I've got my darkest color. Now, you'll notice that a lot of my pencil lines have kind of vanished a little bit. They've started to go away. If you have really dark pencil lines, you might still be able to see them. Since mine were fairly light, I'm very used to doing watercolors. If I couldn't see something that I wanted, I would need to go in with a pencil again and just very, very lightly draw those back on. I would suggest that you do that before you do this next step. But this is the step, again, where we're gonna come in and we're gonna go in with just our darkest color where it needs to go. So for example, we're gonna do this eye right here, and then I'll probably finish the rest off of camera. But I'm gonna come in with my darkest dark and start going around where my eye is, because it's got that whole line all the way around. I'm also gonna do inside the pupil. I'm gonna come in, it has this triangular shape right here that comes down. Lots of these little feathery bits. And again, fill in where I don't want there to be a harsh edge. I've got lots of little details and bits that are these little feathery bits. This helps it look like the feathers of the little owl. If I did not have my surface underneath, that middle tone dry, then all of these would just kind of blur in and get very, very sad looking. And I just realized I covered up an area that I wasn't supposed to. Oh well, I've got a way to kind of make that look almost on purpose. So we're gonna come in, we're gonna do a couple little dots in there where those ones go. We're gonna come and add a little bit up here, little edges that are like not quite straight. All right. All right. So I'm probably going to give at least 2 coats of this dark color where it needs to go. That will help make this area that I wasn't supposed to color look like it's a lighter color, just because adding 2 layers of that dark, which is slightly see-through, down will make that areas that I go over twice look a little darker. But I'm just gonna go in and I'm gonna start adding in all of these little zones. This is the one where I'm trying to be the most precise with my little lines and shapes, etc. Because this is the one that's actually gonna stand out as quote unquote line work. So yeah, I'll check back with me in a minute. All right, so here he is completely done. I have gone over most of my darkest zones a little bit more than once. Some places like here I've gone over about 3 times. Over here I've gone over about 3 times, which means I probably have closer to 4 tones than the 3 I initially needed, but that's fine. I can always have more, I just don't need less. So I can find both my darkest, my lightest, and my middle tones in there. I have all the tones I need for this particular assignment. But you can see some places where I messed up, like right here, where this comes down in this almost J shape. I definitely have more of a slant. This is one of the things that you can't fix in watercolor. Once you've got something darker, it will not go light again, unless you have gouache, which is like watercolor but more opaque. Because watercolor is see-through, the parts that are darker will never be covered up by something that is lighter. It just doesn't happen. So that is why it's very important to have very good outlines whenever you're starting to work. And why you shouldn't just kind of guesstimate whenever you are working, because if you mess up, there is basically no fixing it. You can just try and disguise it, which I've tried to do my best to disguise by making sure everything else is still in that placement that it's supposed to be. So we're gonna call it good enough. I have made sure that all my little daubies up here of paint help that speckled look pass through, that feathery kind of look, by just dabbing on paint in little spots. So he ended up with a little bit more texture probably than this guy right here, but that's not a big deal. So yeah, once I have this, again, I want to make sure that it's dried completely before I put anything on top of it, and before I put it away anywhere, because this, while it's still wet, is going to need that space to dry. If I put something on top of here, it will rip, etc. Even this, if this feels dry to the fingers, I need it to be completely dry. So I'm gonna let this sit out on a drying rack for probably overnight before I put it in, put it away or turn it in or anything like that. As for my watercolors, this does need to get cleaned. If you are not sure how to clean it, the easiest thing to do is to very gently pop out this tray. I'm gonna try and be careful because it's still kind of wet in there. Pop out this tray. If this has areas that drip, for example, this area that has the red in it is very wet still. If it were so full of water that we're going to drip, I want to drip that out in the sink, not on someone's shoe. That has happened this school year. A bright white Air Force One turned red. It was not a good scene. And then this in here I can run under a sink of running water and scrub it with a paper towel or a sponge in order to clean it completely before I put it away for the day.